The most important skill of this century is the ability to select and manage vendors. There's not even a close number two skill.
What are you talking about? Like, if a pitch deck isn't beautiful, I don't care who's making it today, you're not going to get a further call with me.
I think it's much easier to define how one fails than how one succeeds.
My guest today is Auren Hoffman. He's the founder of dozens of companies. He knows and interacts with basically everyone in the tech world that you might know or have heard of. He's the founder of LiveRamp, which sold for over 300 million, SafeGraph, Incubate, The Accelerator, GPU Flex Capital, and host of World of DaaS. He's invested in over 250 plus companies as well, and he basically has seen it all. If you hate hiring and building big teams and believe that fewer people is actually the path to greater entrepreneurial success, then this is the episode for you. I'm Adam Spector, four-time founder and investor in over 200 startups myself, and CEO of Chore. We help founders outsource operations so they have more time, more energy, more focus, so they can build the company of their dreams. Let's dive in. Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. It is with absolute great pleasure. I have Auren Hoffman with me today. I've known Auren for, probably a dozen or so years. I've pitched Auren, who probably doesn't even remember that. He passed on the deal. So I'll never forgive him for that, but maybe it was a good decision. And we've just run in a variety of different circles that sort of have overlapped. I think we have 600 plus mutual connections on LinkedIn. So a pretty high number. I think I have a few who are over 1,000, but pretty high up there. Much more impressively than how Auren and I overlap, however, is the fact that Auren is the founder of dozens of companies. I asked him how many he's founded, and he was not even sure of the number. So we'll have to dig into that a little bit to learn more about his entrepreneurial mindset. Truly, like how I like to start is by asking right off the bat, how do you define entrepreneurial excellence? Like, what does that actually mean to you?
I don't think there's an archetype. So, there are thousands of different types of successful founders. I think it's much easier to define how one fails than how one succeeds.
So, but even still, right, when you're making investments, right, so I hear you, there's not one archetype. Yet at the same time, to be a good investor, you have to have some heuristics you're looking at or looking for. And I know you said when you and I saw each other about 2 weeks ago, that you kind of look at early stage, you look for a certain type of founder that you're looking at. So what does that look like, at least for you, when it comes to putting money to work? There's some.
Honestly, there isn't really a consistent theme on the founders that we've backed, or even if you look historically over hundreds of years of the founders who've been successful, there really is not a consistent theme. The only thing that successful founders almost always have in common is persistence. If you take the other 300 traits you could rank people on, like the next best trait, maybe 25% of the top founders historically have in common. So it's very, very hard to pattern match. Now it's easier to go the other way and say, okay, if you have these other, if someone's like an extreme heroin addict, they're probably not going to be ready to do a found, right? So there's other ways to rule people out sometimes.
And how do you try to figure out if a founder has that level of persistence, not just as an investor, but even as an individual, right? When you think about yourself as a founder, how did you know you had more persistence than the average person, right? You've started a bunch of successful companies, so clearly you have more persistence than others. How do you know, even for yourself individually, you have the next level?
There's a sense that people are not going to give up on something that they think they have a decent probability of success in. Just banging your head against the wall doesn't make that much sense.
Right.
But having some sort of way of just like keep things going when other people would stop. And sometimes you can see that in other traits that people do. There might be some sort of athletic trait that somebody does, or there's some other type of thing, or you can just see it in the fact that they really worked hard to become a chess master. There's some other things that may give you a sense that this person is a little bit more persistent than others.
That's not always things like, oh, they got a 4.0, or I don't know, I think with great inflation nowadays, it's like almost a 5.0 or something, like in school and they went to Harvard. That doesn't necessarily mean you have a high level of persistence, or does it?
Yeah, it often doesn't. In fact, it may mean that they never had any adversity in their life. And it may be a counter prediction depending on who that person is. And if you get a 4.0 in Harvard, well, I think everybody gets a 4.0 in Harvard. So I think maybe if you didn't get a 4.0 in Harvard, that actually might be a sign you might be a good founder. But if you got one, I don't know that that's a good sign.
Maybe because college or school is sort of a well-trodden path versus saying, okay, you went to become an Olympic athlete, or you were the star player on a professional team, or you were the lead salesperson or something, like things that where you have to get told no a lot and you really have to push through. It's sort of whereas I think school is like this clear path that if you have a certain level of intelligence, you can kind of fake it, is my take. But is that the difference maybe?
Yeah, I don't think that if you think of just obviously you have to be smart to be a good founder. It's important, and you have to be smart to join McKinsey, but that's kind of where the overlap ends between the two. And so, just because someone is good for McKinsey and McKinsey is a great place to work doesn't mean they're going to become a great founder, and vice versa. A great founder might not actually be very successful at a company like McKinsey. And so you've got to go where your strengths are most needed.
Yeah. Funny story about McKinsey. I talked to the founder. He was a pretty senior person at McKinsey at one point. He left, started a company. 6 years later, he was still running it, and they were just about to do their Series A. And one of the things he told me is like, oh yeah, but I do my own bookkeeping himself. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, why would you ever do that? It's like, well, I know how to do it, so I can save money. I'm like, you're going to fail. Like, if you think that is like the failure motion, like the right thing to do is spend your time on bookkeeping as a founder when your company's doing something different, and it took you 6 years to reach this point, you can do a Series A, you're moving way too slow, and you're not understanding what it means to move quickly. And like, you're maybe thinking the McKinsey way, you're saving money or something, but not in an entrepreneurial mindset.
I actually have from that story, I wouldn't know either way if that person's good, but just if they were successful at McKinsey, then they're probably less likely to be successful as a great founder, but it probably has nothing to do with whether they chose to do their bookkeeping or not. But my guess. Yeah.
Fair point. So talk about like your background a little bit, right? You founded dozens of companies. You can't even remember how many you founded, which I actually love. Where did that all come from, right? So were you parents entrepreneurial? What got you into this entrepreneurial mindset?
Yeah, everyone's different. It's always hard to say. So for me, I started a couple of companies in high school I knew I had to pay for college. So, and that gave me the ability to pay for college. And then I ran out of money like after my third year of college. So then, then I just started another company to pay for my last year of college. And then that turned out to be a little bit more successful than I had thought. And then just kind of one thing led to another.
So for you then, just starting these companies, was it always just, hey, I need to make money somehow, or I need to achieve some goal, and therefore I'm just going to
I think initially it was, and it wasn't because I remember reading some article in 8th grade in some kids magazine about some kid who made a lot of money. And I'm like, oh, that sounds fun. But I mean, again, like if I maybe had a different path, it's always hard to know. Like, have you ever seen the movie Sliding Doors?
No, actually.
Okay, you have to see that movie. It's one of my favorite movies. It's an amazing movie. But basically, you can take many different paths in life, and your life would be like completely different. And it's very hard to know if all of a sudden I got just a normal job when I was 14 that paid more, or I got the promotion that I wanted to. When I was 14, I got a job working at a frozen yogurt store, and I wanted to be the assistant manager. And I didn't get the promotion, even though someone I thought was less qualified than me, but much older than me, got it. So I quit. And then I started a company. Like, if I got that promotion, maybe I would have been happy at the yogurt store and just eaten a lot of yogurt.
And you think, actually, that was one of my questions sort of related to that is that sort of the driving force, do you think, for you? Like, if lots of people just go get the normal safe job, right? They go get a job at the yogurt store or flipping burgers, and then maybe that slowly gets them a promotion someday, and they're kind of happy with that path. Why were you not? Like, why did it piss you off when the more senior person but less qualified got the promotion and you didn't?
Well, I don't know anyone who doesn't get pissed off. So if somebody gets a promotion, if you think you're better than the person who got the promotion, then that would piss most people off. So I think most people either don't think they're better than the person who got the promotion, or they're not confident in themselves or something like that. But yeah, if you kind of thought that, you would probably quit.
Yeah, no. I mean, I had a similar thing when I was my first job. I sat down with the head of HR, or not head of HR, one of the people in HR, and I said, how do I get to my boss's position? And she said, oh, it's going to take 20 years if you stay here. And I was like, well, literally, I resolved that day. I was like, clearly, I'm going to quit. And maybe I come back someday, but this is not a place for me long term if that is the general path, that it's going to take 20 years to grow into my boss position.
Yep.
But okay, so it was just, so for you, was all these companies was just like, I have an idea and I want to go start it? Like, and how did you even have time for starting dozens of companies? Was it many failed and you started something new? Like, it was most people have found, I founded 4 companies, and I think many people would say like that's way more than the large majority of people. Dozens is a whole nother level. What do you do differently? Like, I know maybe it's hard for you to break. Like, what do you think is different about you?
I mean, I think a lot of people just do lots of different things. So I don't know that there's anything particularly different.
Was it just you were like finding, you had a new job, new company, like when you saw an idea and said, this is an opportunity I want to go after, and just said, I'm going to go find people who can help me do it? And would you read a lot of books about the topic? Like, how did you get smart on the area that you wanted to found?
The riskiest thing often someone can do is just kind of work for a big company, right? It's a very, very risky thing to do often, is to put your eggs in some like random basket somewhere that you don't control. And that there could be a lot of different winds that could control your destiny. So you want to be able to, a way to de-risk life is to control your own destiny. I mean, if you're fairly risk averse, which I am extremely risk averse, then you're going to actually calculate risk in a rational way.
Mm. So that I just want to highlight that point. Like, that to me is, you're essentially flipping the script, I think, for most people, right? Most people get a sort of standard job, right? You've started lots of companies. They've worked for your companies. They obviously are not all entrepreneurs. You have employees. And you're essentially saying the riskiest thing for them is to take a job at a company instead of being an entrepreneur. Is that right?
No, I don't think that's necessarily risky. The riskiest thing is to take a job at a very large company where almost certainly your growth is going to be slow, because they're not going to give you a chance to fail. So if you're intentionally slowing your growth, especially as a young person, so a lot of young people, they actually go to some sort of place where they're intentionally slowing their growth. That is extremely risky. And that a lot of things could still work out, but you got to be really lucky for them to work out. The only thing you have going for you is to be investing in yourself massively and growing really, really, really quickly. And so you don't want to go to a place where your growth starts to slow pretty dramatically.
Yeah. And so then
the only way for your growth to increase is by having a high likelihood of failure, and by working on interesting projects with super interesting people where your pace is moving really fast. Probably it also means you're working massive number of hours, right? So these are all the ways, and everyone around you is working massive hours. These are all the ways to increase your growth rate. And increasing growth rate is really, really, really important, especially when you're young.
And is the reason it's important is because it sets you on a different trajectory, essentially starts compounding? Is that the reason why it's...
Yeah, exactly. Your growth compounds at a very, very, very fast rate. And let's say the average 22-year-old is probably growing at 10% a year or something. If you just think of like growth usually equal to income. So 7 years later, their income's like roughly double what it was, right? That's great. That's fine. Like 10% a year is definitely nothing. There's nothing wrong with that. But, you could probably grow much, much, much faster, 30, 40, 50% a year, at least initially. And then afterwards, okay, at some point you can't grow that much as a percentage, but on an absolute basis, you could grow faster every year than you grew in the past. And that should be your goal. On an absolute basis, am I growing faster this year than I grew last year? On a percentage basis, it might be less, but on absolute, it has to go up every single year.
Why do you think it's so hard for people to grasp that mindset? Because once again, my impression is the large majority of people in the world don't have that mindset. They're sort of happy with the 10% or less growth.
Yeah, I don't think most people are optimizing for lots of things. I mean, if you're optimizing to be, if you're relatively smart, and you want to be relatively wealthy, it's pretty easy to do. And the people who don't do it, I think, are just not optimizing for it. So I think, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You can be extremely happy, have a very fulfilled life. You don't need tons of money. I think everyone has a different optimization function that they're working on, and everyone's different.
How do you keep yourself growing every day, right? So you're now in the more absolute phase because you've had so much early growth. How do you keep yourself on an absolute basis continuing to grow?
I think it's extremely hard, and I struggle with it every day.
Are there any things you try to do to keep it up, though? Or any, like, examples, heuristics, ideas, mindsets?
I think you have to be very mindful of it and be constantly trying to figure out how to do things differently. Otherwise, you're going to end up in some sort of local maxima. And that is the death of, where a lot of somewhat successful people end up, is in that spot. And so you really do not want to end up in that spot.
Do they end up in that spot because they've reached this local maximum where they're like pretty happy, they've done mostly successful, they have a level of ego, people praise them for the things they've done in the past, and they kind of just give up on doing more, or they just...
If that's the case, I think that's fine, because then that's what they're optimizing for. So they've reached the place where they want to reach, but I think for some people that they're not satisfied with that. They want to keep growing. They just don't know necessarily how to do it, or they're constantly, as you get more successful, when you're younger and early in your career, you don't see very many good opportunities. And so the simple thing, heuristic, is to do the good opportunities instead of the bad opportunities, right? And you get relatively good at that. As you get more successful in life, all you see is good opportunities. You rarely see anything else. And if you just take those good opportunities, you're going to end up in a local maxima. So you have to be going for the great opportunities. Sometimes the great opportunities are disguised as bad opportunities. But you can't spend your time on the good things, and you get good things coming across. You could be on the board of, I don't know, Starbucks or something. Like, that would be a good opportunity. Seems cool. I know that's going to be good for, I can brag to my friends I'm on the board of Starbucks, but like, are you really going to learn that much? Are you really going to grow? Is it really going to help you? So there's all these different things that people end up, doing. They take these like good opportunities, and then they don't take the time to go after great things.
Yeah. I don't know if it's quite the same, but I was having a debate with a friend recently so I built this sort of longevity doctor in ChatGPT, and it's a whole project with all this incredibly detailed prompt, and spent a lot of time building it. And they said, well, why are you spending time doing this? It seems like a waste of time. And I said, well, I want to have a healthier, happier life. But two, I want to push myself to be really good at using AI. And this person, on the other hand, is spending their time learning how to fly and do all that sort of stuff. And to me, I'm like, that was a better use of my time to push myself to get better in trying something new versus something that was maybe easier. Like, you're learning how to fly is cool too, but different.
I mean, all these things are really hard to do. They're really hard to know, and you're never going to be optimal. So everyone is like massively suboptimal. They're not. And so it's really just like, can I be a little bit better next month than I was last month? Can I grow just slightly faster? I could have grown way faster last year. All I'm asking to do this year is grow a little bit faster than I grew last year on an absolute basis.
Do you track that for yourself? Like, how do you track it?
I think it's very hard to track. And so you can kind of like look at it retrospectively and have some sort of sense of it. But like, one thing I'm trying to do right now is read fewer books. I've always been a massive reader of books, and I just think most of the books I've read, I actually don't even remember. So I think it's actually not as good of a use of my time as I thought. And I think there's much better uses of my time than reading books. I mean, for me, it's relaxing, which is nice, or it's entertaining, and there's other reasons to do it. But like, maybe even watching a fun movie is better than reading a book for me.
It's certainly a shorter amount of time to get a full story is the upside of a movie. I will miss, though, your book reviews that you put in your newsletter. So but I know you keep sending out your 5 links every month, and you've been doing that for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I hope we'll keep seeing a lot of those. In actually, speaking of reading, maybe we'd go in that direction for a second. Do you think that's a mindset or something that separates better founders from others? Is there willingness and interest in reading either lots of new things or going really deep on a topic?
I used to think that, but I've seen a lot of evidence that it doesn't correlate.
Right.
People who are great readers sometimes are not, great founders. People who are great founders sometimes, it's a trait that I value because I do it. But I think my bias comes in there, and I don't know that it has any signal either way.
Yep. Fair enough. So let's talk about a little bit about some of the really big successes that you've had, right? So LiveRamp and SafeGraph have been very successful companies, and pretty well known, especially in the data space. Maybe starts like historically, how did you get into data? Like you started these dozens of companies. I don't even know what they were early on, and yet somehow you ended up in this world of data. Yes, you're a math person and you enjoy math. Like why data over a million things you could have done?
Yeah, I mean, that's an area that I happen to be good at, is just data science, probability, statistics. It's just an area that I've always been interested in. It's an area that I studied in college. I studied before probably a lot of other people got into it. So I studied in the 90s. And so that's just an area that, like, probably where I have a little bit more of an advantage than other people.
And what gave you the idea for LiveRamp? Like, where did that come from? And then how did it get started? Like, what's the genesis story?
LiveRamp was a pivot. So we had another company, and that company was doing okay, but not great. And we're running into issues. And so we had a different idea. We pivoted the company to LiveRamp. So like halfway into that company, 4 years in, we kind of made a harder pivot to LiveRamp. And then LiveRamp really started to take off. So it wasn't like the original genesis, but we were fortunate that we had a really good team. We had some money in the bank. We had, we were still young, and so we weren't encumbered by too much experience. And then we happened to just have a couple different views of the world that other people didn't have. So at the time, there was a view that there was too many vendors. Companies had way too many vendors. There was this thing called the Lumascape, where you just had you just saw tons of marketing logos, and everybody was saying there's going to be vendor consolidation and we're going to have fewer vendors. And so lots of people were building their future models around that. And we believed that the opposite was going to happen. We believed that the future was that there were going to be even more vendors, and the slide was going to be even more confusing than it was. And so we made a big bet on that, and that, the big thing you would need is to integrate amongst all these vendors. And at the time, we're really the only one that believed that. So it made it. And so it's important to be contrarian, but it's even more important to be right. And then in that case, we were, both contrarian and right.
And so you would raise some money for the first sort of the pre-pivot company, raise money, standard VC, fundraise, all that stuff. And did you do that based on previous successes and wins, or was it sort of you were an unknown founder at that point and had a good idea, a good team? And
I mean, I had a little bit of a track record, but certainly not any like significant amount of track record.
And then, okay, so then you go pivot, and then where does LiveRamp go? Like, does it just, you said it took off. I mean, is that, what sort of growth rate does that look like? Team size, how did it grow? What are all the key pieces?
It went from like 1 million the first year to 9 million the second year to 30-ish million, kind of like that kind of growth rate. So it was just like quite high growth rate.
The sort of triple, double type of thing that.
Yeah. And we did it, and we ended up doing that. We're, profitably. So we ended up raising some money, but like we didn't end up needing the money. And so it was we weren't able to like spend quickly. We weren't able to hire quickly.
So what then, if anything, slowed it down, right? I mean, $310 million exit is great, but at that growth rate, one would have said, okay, that's going to be a multi-billion-dollar exit.
That's exactly right. And if we had known better at the time, we probably shouldn't have sold it. But absolutely, you're correct.
So, well, what happened? Like, what do you think? What lessons learned, and what made you decide to sort of sell when you did? And what are all the key things that occurred to make those decisions happen at the time that you, of course, thought were right at the time?
I mean, these things are always hard to know, but that was quite a long time ago. And today you have things like secondaries, and you have lots of other kind of things, and the market is different and it's more robust. So it'd be easier to keep things going. But even back then, if I was smarter, I probably would have kept things going
and just found a way to keep it moving.
Yeah.
Were there key things like how many people did you end up hiring at LiveRamp?
At the time of sale, we had maybe 60 or so.
Okay, so relatively small for a company of that size. That's great. I mean, it's still very profitable, as you said. Then it probably on a per revenue basis, very high revenue per employee.
Correct.
And are there key things that you learned that you think are still applicable today when it comes to building a team, growing a team,
I think the most common mistake that founders make, and I think it's true for almost every venture-backed founder, is that they overhire. And so people should hire much slower. They should have fewer people. Their revenue per employee should be higher. In some cases, it should be significantly higher, like anywhere between 2 to 10x higher than it is. They should rely more on vendors and contractors and other types of things to do things. Probably shouldn't hire executives or shouldn't hire executives nearly as quickly as they do. They should rent those executives instead. So there's a whole bunch of kind of things around people. You want to keep that team as small as possible to reduce operational complexity. And you want to spend as little of your time hiring and managing. Those are the two biggest time sucks for most founders. And you want to spend much more time in your business.
Yeah. No, you just hit on my biggest pet peeve completely. Like this is the whole piece, of course, of my current company, Chore, is exactly that. It's like just you need to rent your team to go run your whole back office, in our case, the operational piece, because you don't want the overhead of more hiring and managing someone for a role that is not relevant to the actual outcomes of the company. Like it's important, you need to run your operations, but you don't need to have someone you're managing who is CEO. You don't want to manage some operations person. I
think you want to manage as few people as possible.
Yep.
And you want them to manage as few people as possible. You don't want to have many skips. You certainly don't want to have skips of skips. Or you want to delay that as much as possible until you're like a really big company.
Why do you think founders mess this up? It's because they feel an obligation. Like hiring feels like a quick way to go faster, and that's what VCs want.
I think there's a lot of different things. I also think there's a lot of bad advice. Sometimes a lot of VCs give very bad advice around those things. And also around hiring executives is almost always really bad advice. So then they start there, and then the executives kind of see the need to hire, and then they build out a plan, like a sales plan, which often involves people, and there's all these other types of things. It's really hard to do. And then if you're spending all your time kind of recruiting and managing, then in some ways in your head, you kind of need to justify that. So it's a mistake that almost every venture-backed founder makes. I've made that multiple times in my life. And it's a mistake that I hope not to make in the future, but probably will make, because it is very, very tempting to make that mistake.
Yeah, it always feels like I have too much work. I need to get it off my plate. Therefore, I will hire someone to take on this work. And it seems like the easy win. Should people then instead break down, instead of like I'm going to go hire someone? Is it better to sit there? Like, what is the way to go about this? Is it break down the actual work that you're doing and say, what can I really hand off? Or can I break this into a chunk to hand to someone already on the team? Or in the AI world today, can I use AI instead for this? Like, is that the right way to
Yeah, it should be. I should try to figure out a way to use some sort of vendor to do it. That could be an API, an AI, a piece of software. It might be human to do it, but an outsource. And then again, do I really need someone full-time do this? Could I use someone part-time? So a lot of times people hire like a chief marketing officer or a chief financial officer or something like that. And really they just need like a lot of strategy. And that person you could rent for 1 or 2 days a month for all the strategy, and you can get like the best person with the best strategy. If you're going to own that person, if you're going to hire that person, you might get the number 100,000th best person. So instead of getting the best, you get 100,000th best. And of course, they don't want to do all the other work. They just want to do the strategy. So you're not going to optimize them in the right way, et cetera. So it's almost always a bad idea to hire like these like really great executives. Now, if you're a huge company, you're massive, you're Stripe or something, okay, well, then it makes sense at some point to go do that. But for most companies, certainly under $100 million revenue company, and usually, let's say, even under $500 million revenue company, like hiring execs, like real execs, like who look like execs, is a bad idea. You can call someone your CMO and your CFO, but if they're actually a CMO and a CFO, it's probably a bad idea.
Yeah, no, we just this week decided to call off a sort of head of customer success role internally because we were trying to hire for it, spend a lot of time on it. and we're getting the quality candidates we kind of wanted and expected, and said, okay, let's rethink how we're going to do this. Like, this isn't working. Let's rethink it. And this conversation has inspired me to say even more so, like, let's find new ways to solve this and not just hire.
Yeah, have someone internally who can run it, and then give them the scaffolding. And that person might be 27 years old and just a real up and comer, and then give them the opportunity to work with mentors and other types of people who would love to mentor them.
Yep.
And give them an opportunity. If you have someone in your company that you think has the potential to become a great exec, you just invest in that person, make them a great exec, and show them that you believe in them. Oftentimes people layer that person, then that person leaves, and the exec you have is not nearly as good as the one you had. Right. It's all these like compounding types of things. It's hard to get other up and comers because they don't see a path to growth. Just like when you were in your original company and someone told you it took 20 years to get your boss's job, you don't want to be at a company like that.
Correct. And the fact that a company and the head of the HR person was willing to say that was its own form of saying, this is the wrong company for me.
Yeah. And basically, like, the other thing, by the way, is like the simple heuristic is you probably don't want to join a company that has anyone in the company with the title of HR. So if there's someone in your company with the title HR, that's probably a good sign that it's a bad company.
Okay, why is that? 'Cause so many companies want to hire a head of HR or have an HR person. We don't have anyone in HR for a lot of reasons you're probably going to say, but I've had people on my team say, we really need an HR person. And I'm like, no, like, that just sounds like overhead in a layer that is just meant to just like somehow go between me as CEO and you as the team. And like, that means we're failing as a culture if I need that.
Yeah, there are good, very good. And there are some great HR people ops, people that are out there, but they're extremely rare. So if you go to Google and hire an engineer from Google, you probably are going to find a really good person. There's a good chance. There's at least a decent chance that there's a lot of really good engineers at Google. And if you hire one, maybe that person will be good for your company. The chance that if you just pick a random HR person from Google and they're good is like extremely low. Like of their, whatever they have, there might be one or two that are really good.
Wouldn't Google say it didn't hire everyone who's really good? Like Google just has the highest standards for hiring?
I don't think that's the case. I think they have extremely high standards in engineering. And, if you look at other areas like marketing or HR, I think they do have high standards for that particular discipline. But the level of people in that discipline is so low that even if they're getting the top 10% of people, that top 10% of people are still in the bottom 10% of their company. So, it's just a very hard, there are just not that many great people that go into HR. So even if you do need to hire for an HR role, my main advice would be to hire someone who's never done HR before. And the best HR people I've ever met are ones who never did it before their current role.
How do you even define a great HR person? Like, what does that mean from an operational standpoint for a company?
I mean, it's usually a good capital allocator. So it's how do you allocate capital into the highest need, and how do you move that capital around? How do you grow that capital? How do you invest in people, et cetera? So it's, and every company is different. Obviously, in a company like the U.S. Army, okay, HR is really important. You have so many people, and you have to think about all these things. Or Walmart, the biggest employer in the world, you have so many people. Or even like a McKinsey, where they're just constantly having to recruit and hire, and they have high churn in their employees and stuff. But ideally, in a company, you want to have as few people as possible, right? And so you want to have, and you want to be recruiting as little as possible. So you want to, ideally, when you recruit people, you want them to stay for a really long time. So you don't have to recruit new ones. And then you want to figure out every way possible where you don't need to recruit new people. So you want to spend most of your time actually doing real things rather than recruiting and managing people.
Yeah. And that's the reason not to have this HR person, because once again, you want to hopefully just hire the right people in the first place, build the right culture, and therefore you essentially shouldn't need it. And so it's a negative signal if you have that HR person early on, because.
And also a lot of HR is just about like bureaucracy, or it's about CYA. It's about making sure you don't get sued for X thing, or I'll do this thing. But what they don't realize is when you do this thing to prevent you from being sued, it makes everyone in your company's life like 1% worse.
Right.
Right. And so now you're trusting your employees a little bit less. Yeah, it does help you not get sued, but it makes everyone less happy, less productive, etc. And I'd rather trade out. Okay, well, occasionally somebody might, you don't have all the guardrails for everything. The best remedy to all these things is just treat people well, have fewer people so you can spend more time with them, be selective about who you spend time with, pay them fairly, let them work on super interesting things, let them work on super hard problems, let them actually work hard, because you want people who are optimizing for growth. So let them actually hit and show them that you can help them grow really fast with you. Those are the things that you really want to do. And a lot of times, like a lot of HR is antithetical to all of those things.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
A lot of HR people will tell you you don't want people to work hard. I've interviewed a lot of people and they say that, and it's just crazy. Well, like who is optimizing for their growth doesn't want to work hard? Like, that's just insane.
Right. You're that means if you are hiring people who don't want to work hard, you're optimizing your company for slow growth or maybe eventual death.
And on anyone you are optimizing who wants to grow will leave. Right. So you're basically, a lot of the really best people that you have will leave your company.
And are there roles where you say you absolutely should have a senior person? Is it like a chief product officer or a technology officer or a head of sales? Are there any senior roles that you do think are?
By senior, you mean someone with tons of experience, and who's had big roles before? I would say no. If you're hiring an individual contributor engineer and they have 20 years of experience and you're going to pay them a lot of money, great. But if you're hiring like a VP of engineering who's going to manage 100 people and you want someone who's managed hundreds of people before or something like that, then I would say the best bet is to promote internally.
Okay. And when you think through hiring and trying to find those high growth people, are there certain things that you've done across all of your companies to identify? I'm sure you made lots of hiring mistakes too, but like what are things you've learned over all these years in your compounded learning world?
I think it's very, very, very hard. I mean, if you really think about it, you want that person who is like the 10Xer.
Of course.
And that is very rare. So that person, I've hired many, many, many people in my life. Obviously, I've only hired people that I thought were talented people and I thought would be good in the company. And some of them, maybe didn't work out. Most of them worked out fine. And every once in a while, there was someone who became a 10Xer, and it was be really, in retrospect, impossible to predict the ones that became 10Xers from the interviews.
And okay, so it's impossible to predict. Are there still things I'm sure you've tried to improve your hiring process? Like, are there questions you like to ask, things you look for?
I think part of the hiring process is to reduce your time in hiring. So how do you reduce your time to hire people?
CEO, you mean? As like the CEO?
Of everyone in the company. Yeah.
And so what have you done to reduce time, like in that process, and still get to a good answer being, I'm going to hire someone who's going to stick around and be high growth?
One way might be to do a written interview instead of like an in-person, so that might be a stage that you can do things on. You can learn a lot about people. I also think like a lot of questions are about, does that person think extremely quickly on their feet? Mm-hmm. And for certain roles, that is very important. But for 95+% of roles, that is not important at all. And so, maybe it's important that somebody can make decisions relatively quickly, but they don't have to make decisions in the sub-second thing. You're not like an elite athlete who needs to decide, okay, who to pass the ball to in 0.01 seconds or something, or, a great video game player that needs to take hundreds of actions per second or something, 100 actions per minute. That is not what most people are. They need to make decisions, and sometimes they have hours to make decisions. Sometimes they have many minutes to make decision, etc.
They still need to make decisions. I mean, I find some people just are unwilling to make a decision, which can be very frustrating, at least for me.
Yeah.
Is the role or kind of the skill set expectation changing in your mind with like the world of AI? So like you mentioned, hey, do a written exam. I worry we can't do those anymore, at least at Shore, because people will just use AI to do the whole thing. So we have to do things live now a bit more. Have you found that either the skill sets to be successful in the world of AI or to interview people in the world of AI has changed at all?
I think it is important to encourage people to use AI in your interview.
With a caveat, I'll give you a funny example. We had someone who wasn't the interview that I did, but my teammate did it, where the person literally would type in the question. He tried to do it without the interviewer knowing, type it into like ChatGPT and essentially read out the ChatGPT answer in real time. And it was like blatantly obvious that he was essentially asking AI to answer every single question on the call live. That was too much of a use of AI. Like I want to promote use of AI, but not.
If AI is going to answer the question better than any human would, then they should use that. They should maybe be more upfront about it. Say, hey, by the way, that's a good question. Let me ask 3 AIs about it. I'm going to look at those 3 AIs. They're going to synthesize it and give you the best answer. We'll do it in real time together. I mean, if AI can answer, if you're asking me a question, what's 25 times 25? And a calculator can answer it better than I can do in my head. I don't know, maybe it is better to just use the calculator. And maybe that question is not a great question. It really depends on on what the role is and how you think about that role, etc. So I think for like coding challenges, take home coding challenges is great. What I would recommend is that you give them like some sort of time. Hey, do this in under 2 hours, under 3 hours, or something like that, and record your screen doing it. Use every AI tool you can and send us the full recording on it. And then just watch the tools that they use. If you give someone a coding challenge and they're not using Cursor or some other Windsurf or some sort of like, AI IDE, well, you don't want them anyway, right? So that's simple. You can just immediately eliminate them if they're kind of doing things like totally old school. And then you kind of want to watch, and also you might learn a lot. So, what I have found in talking to people when you ask them to use AI, and then you realize, they did this thing, or they built this tool, or they made this presentation, etc. Especially like a marketing person or something like that, like they're going to be using these AI tools for you, and then you ask them about it, or you see a screen share of what they're doing. And then you can, oh, wow, I never even heard of this tool. Why'd you use that? Oh, yeah, I was like discovering and I found this. It was really easy. Like, that's actually really interesting.
Yeah. And you got to go deep and understand why they were thinking a certain way they were thinking.
Yeah. And by the way, like the best employees are the ones that, the most important skill of this century is the ability to select and manage vendors. There's not even a close number 2 skill. And so if you can spot that in the interview process, those are the people that you want to bring onto your company.
So I've heard this recently from some other folks who's saying that's sort of one of the most important, either the most or one of the most important skills. Why do you view that as the most important skill? Or is that more because of AI nowadays and the ability to select and then manage and kind of manage?
I think it was true before AI, way before AI, but it's even more true in the AI world. But the almost every company outside of Amazon, Walmart, and the U.S. Army has way more vendors than employees. Mm-hmm. So sometimes they have 100x more vendors or 10x more vendors than employees. So already, for almost every company, your vendors are actually way more important. And vendors are a lot easier to manage and swap out and change and optimize than employee. And vendors change quickly. If you evaluate someone for your company 6 months ago and you realize they weren't good for your company, it's unlikely that they made themselves so much better today that they're good for your company today. But a vendor could change so radically in 6 months that it could be not good for your company 6 months ago, and today it could be actually amazing for your company. So it's things are changing just much, much faster in the vendor world than a human can change.
And is that, vendor, you apply the same heuristic to contractors? Like, in other words, your point being like hire lots of contractors to do these sort of one-off tasks with fewer people to manage. Does the same thing apply? Because contractors hopefully are always constantly improving as well and getting better and making sure their craft is great. Like they sort of have an incentive that is aligned with you to be great.
I certainly think that contractors are better than employees for like a unique task that you want to be able to do. And often you don't need someone like full time to do that task. But um, but they're harder to manage than to manage software. So ideally, you manage the software, and most people are really bad at selecting software and are really bad at managing it. So most people who use software are using 5% of its power or something, and they're not so good at it. And it's a really hard skill. There are thousands, potentially hundreds of thousands of books about how to hire and manage great people. Every MBA has dozens of courses about how to do that. We've already talked about that a lot on this podcast. Um, there's basically no book about how to select and manage vendors. There's no MBA course on it. There's nothing. And there's like very limited knowledge about how to do it. There's very few people who are good at it. And not even great. And there's almost the only people who are great are like these like weird people in Eastern Europe that are running $300 million companies with one person or something. And you could never hire them. So it's a very, very, very hard skill to develop. And the only way to develop it is to actually keep doing it and get better at it and realize that it's an important skill to invest in.
So maybe let's write the preamble to your future book about how to select and hire, manage vendors. What are the key things to get good at it? Like, how do you?
I wouldn't say I'm that good at it. And so I'm trying to get better at it. But I've met people who are way, 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 way better than I am.
What skills do those people have? Like, what are the things you think makes them?
I wish I knew. So
you're hard to get these answers out of. I'm like,
yeah, part of it's actually just doing it. So it's like literally spending a huge portion of your day evaluating vendors, trying different things out, trying different tools out. I mean, how much of your day is spent on that? Should be an extremely high percentage, I think, turns out. And so it's like most people are spending a very, very, very low percentage of their day doing those things.
And so for those people who you'd identify as being great at this, is part of their greatness that they can go deep on, hey, I want to choose the best CRM. And they're like, oh yeah, I've tried like the 10 different CRMs that are out there today. Here are the pros and cons of each. And this is why I would select this one or why I would use this one today. Is it like that level of depth that they can go into? Because they've
maybe though. I mean, probably what they're really probably has nothing to do with like the CRM. There's probably like, because the CRM may have 50 sub vendors in it. And so they're kind of moving things around. They're kind of figuring it out, what to do there, et cetera. They're constantly swapping them out. They're obviously have some way of tying all these vendors together. So they're good at Pipedream or End-to-End or Zapier, but, old school, et cetera. And so almost everyone who's good at vendors is good at stringing them together. That's the first way just to identify. Like if someone is not like amazing at stringing vendors together, then they're probably not good at selecting vendors.
Yes.
So that's the first thing to look at. It's just like, what do you do? Like, show me and back in the day, I would never hire someone that wasn't good at like Zapier, like for a marketing role. Like that would be crazy. Now that's maybe migrated to a Pipedream or End-to-End or some of these like a little bit more advanced than Zapier type of systems. And then, may even advance beyond that at some point.
What about the power of defaults? And what I mean by that is, there's also probably an argument that a lot of people would say, hey, like you to your point, is like, you want to be really focused on what you're good at as a founder. You want to go get out there and get doing stuff, and building your product. And so if you're spending all of your day evaluating the best HR systems, then evaluating all the vendors for HR, evaluating all the vendors for CRM, evaluate all the vendors for data. What about just choosing the default? Like, isn't there safety in just choosing?
Yeah, I think some of this is good. You have to kind of understand. So you have to understand. It's always hard to know what to go deep on and what not to. Like I have never like proven that the world is round, in any like significant way to myself, but I make the assumption that it is. I've never proven that, we landed on the moon in 1969, but I'm making the assumption that we did. So there's just some things where you just go with the assumption. You go with you don't have to go like all the way to first principles on every single thing. That would be impossible to do. You have to choose when to go do that. But you also have to understand the other way. Like if you today decided to use Salesforce for a company, this seems like a very stupid idea. Right. So it would be, I would never invest in a company today that would choose to go with Salesforce.
Yep.
It is almost the dumbest thing you can do. It is literally the pretty much the worst piece of software. I can't even think. I mean, I'm sure there are worse ones like maybe Workday or something, but like most startups don't get there, right? So it's just a super, super dumb thing to do. So that is an example of something where you probably don't want to go with the default there. And also they're like really against AI and they don't allow you to move your data around. And there's just all these other kind of issues with that particular piece of software. So you want to actually have some sort of sense of like what you could do. You don't want to get so rigid in a model that you're going to be stuck somewhere, and that could be something where you get stuck really quickly.
How do you decide? I mean, you're such a busy founder yourself and leader. How do you decide where to go in deep on those first principles and where to ignore them and go a little bit with the defaults? Is there any?
It's very, very difficult. So I don't think I do a very good job of it. I admire people who do it. Again, like you don't have to be perfect in any of these things. You just have to be like getting a little bit better every year or every month, and you have to be better than your peers at it. The good thing about selecting and managing vendors is pretty much everyone's terrible at it. So if you just get to like bad, you'll be like better than 90% of people. And if you get to, okay, you'll be better than 99% of people. So it's really about, it's like that old joke about tying your shoes with the bear. You just have to be faster than the other guy.
Yeah. Yep. Do you think that do you look for that when you make investments? Like, is someone like going deep on different vendors and can kind of understand these things? Is that almost one of the things you look for?
I think it's helpful it's helpful to know. And you could usually see it too in their product velocity.
Yeah.
If they're building products really quickly, they're probably using a lot of these like really advanced tools right now to help them do that. And so if you see a product, nowadays, if you see a UI and the UI isn't like absolutely beautiful, you're probably not going to invest in it. Whereas back in the day, you could say, oh, they're a back-end engineer. They're not going to make a beautiful UI. Whereas today, it's like really easy to make something like, maybe it's not like the most gorgeous thing ever, but it's usually pretty good and functional.
I've made the same point about pitch decks. If a pitch deck isn't beautiful, I don't care who's making it today. It's you're not going to get a further call with me.
Yeah, it's good. That could be a really good point. Yeah.
For the same reason. So let's talk through a little bit more about like LiveRamp, SafeGraph, and like just building the company. So we talked about hiring, building the team up. What about resource allocation? Like, how do you identify what to allocate resources on, when to allocate them? As a CEO, how do you break that down from your own individual like time where you should focus, and then where to put those resources on a regular basis?
I mean, these are really hard decisions that I don't know that there's like any like simple answer to. Every situation is very, very, very different, and everyone has different optimizations for their companies. So I think it is very specific, and just, any advice you would give in one company, it's almost certainly what you would not give in another company.
How about maybe at a high level, is there a difference in like spend more time on building a moat around sales or a product moat? Is there any sort of like just high level, like
the high level thing, and I don't want to be a broken record, but the high level thing is like definitely have fewer people in your company.
Yes.
Right. So the more you do that, the more everyone's going to be focused, the more everyone is going to be understand the full entirety of the company, the more that they can work on it. Likely you can have much better people, much higher quality people. They could be growing faster. They're going to be happier because they're growing faster. So it's a really compounding thing, both compounding for them in their career, but also compounding for your company. Yeah. So I would do everything possible. I think most companies have like, way, way, way too many people. Most companies could have at least half. They could at least cut 50%. And I think a lot of companies could cut 80, 90% of people. It doesn't mean they're going to lower their spending, because they're going to have to really load up on vendors and other types of things that are out there. So it's not this, but you're going to be able to move much, much, much faster than you were before.
I mean, we famously saw this when Elon bought Twitter, right? And as a former employee of Twitter, everyone was doom and gloom. Twitter is going to fail and break, and it wasn't going to keep working. And lo and behold, the server stayed up and it kept working. And
one of the problems, and I'm not familiar with Twitter per se, but one of the problems with most companies is like a very high percentage, somewhere between 20 to 40% of people are actually negative value. So it actually is not that they're like low value, they're negative. Yep. And those negative value people really hurt everyone else. significantly. So now identifying those people are really hard to do. And I think sometimes you have to do it in a very surgical way. And if you just fire everyone out at once, you might not hit those people. So if you think of like Meta, what they did is they did like a series of like 5 to 10% layoffs a few years ago. And in some ways, like you could say that's the worst thing you should do as a company, because like you should just do one big one and then kind of hire back. But they kept doing these surgical ones because they weren't sure who these people were. And they had to get like very, very, very surgical over time until they could kind of really like weed that out and weed out the bureaucracy and weed out like all these different kind of layers of management and stuff like that. But if you can do that, your company's going to move so much faster. And one area I think is like really, really predictive is how many salespeople you have. Almost every company has way too many salespeople. And if you get rid of a bunch of salespeople, almost certainly your sales will go up. And people like always think the opposite, but it's like literally like I have so much proof to show that by reducing your salespeople, you will increase your sales.
I mean, at some point you can decrease the number of salespeople to essentially zero, where it's just the founder selling again, but that might be too much, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's at some point where you could decrease it to zero and all your sales will go to zero, or something like that, or your sales will get reduced pretty dramatically. So there is a point where you can reduce it too much. So you can't take any of these rules. Obviously, you can take, if you want to reduce the number of people, you can reduce all the people in your company to zero and fire yourself, and probably the company doesn't run anymore. Like AI is not going to run everything today.
Yeah.
So there's a point where you can't, it's just like just today, most companies have way too many people. It's possible in the future that companies will have way too few people and they need to build back up, but that's probably pretty far in the future.
Do you think there's a world with like the rise of AI that the amount that everyone can get done? I mean, it seems sort of obvious that like the amount people can get done is dramatically increasing. Do we get to a point where there truly are these companies, as you mentioned, sort of the Eastern European companies, the guys running $300 million in revenue with like just himself? Is that more and more the future, or is it just leaner companies hiring lots of agents and or vendors and or contractors?
Well, I think the revenue per employee will go up, and whether it goes up to 100 million per person seems like unlikely to happen, but except in rare cases. But it should go up pretty dramatically over time. Again, it doesn't mean your expenses are going to go down.
Yeah.
Your expenses might be just as high, might even be higher. I'd rather have higher expenses with fewer people, and pay those people more, and because I can move so much faster, and then that could generate, ultimately a much better return on the company, because I can move faster, I can iterate quickly, I can have happier people who stay for longer, etc.
Speaking of key people, do you find having co-founders is critical or not critical, or maybe it just also depends on sort of the stage where you are as a founder?
I think it really depends. It's always nice to work with other great people that you like to work with. So
I mean, you had co-founders at LiveRamp, SafeGraph, and
yeah. So I mean, I think it can be great, but like when we invest in companies, it's not. We don't have like a hard and fast rule about it. Certainly, having co-founders de-risks it from the investor, because it shows that they already can recruit someone else who's super talented. If you meet someone who's super talented and then you meet a co-founder who's also super talented, well, that shows you that at least they can convince somebody else to join, or they could do it together, they get along, etc. So it de-risks it as an investor perspective, but it's not necessarily predictive. There's plenty of great companies that only have one founder.
And also there's lots of companies that fail because they have a big co-founder breakup, and that just destroys all the value.
Yeah, I'm somewhat skeptical of that, but yes. I haven't really seen companies fail because of that.
Fair point. I very much appreciate your contrarian nature on so many things, which is great. Are there so are there different methods from a founder cultural fit that make people more successful as well? Like, are there things where like, hey, like there's all these stories. You have these sort of the standard stories of like the Elon Musk, the Jeff Bezos, the Bill Gates, these sort of well-known, written about everywhere founders in the world, who are fairly mercurial to some extent. And maybe that's because that's why they have big stories written about them, but they've also built massive companies. Is there a mindset that they embody that you think people should try to emulate, or are they just ones who get written about more often?
Again, I don't think that if you looked at the top 10,000 most successful founders in the last few hundred years, and you looked at all the traits that they had in common, I just don't think there'll be very many traits that they have in common. So it's very hard to take like one particular story and then extrapolate from that particular story. Yes, Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are amazing and they're incredible people, but just there might be like a one of one person, and it's very, very difficult to emulate that person.
So is that potentially why as a VC yourself, is that why VC as a class has not been really that successful? Is because it's just that hard to pattern match and identify who's truly the best person to back?
It's very, very hard, and it may change.
Yeah.
So the types of skills that was really important 20 years ago may not be as important as today. I mean, some things are probably eternal, but some things aren't. And I'm sure that, John D. Rockefeller today would still be massively successful, and the young Bill Gates today would be massively successful, et cetera. So some things are pretty eternal, but some things are quite different.
Are there things, speaking of eternal versus differences, are there things that you did completely differently or things you did the same going from LiveRamp to SafeGraph? And how much time did you take off between those two? Because they're both in the data space. How much time did you take off when you went from one to the next? And why did you decide to start SafeGraph? And then what ideas or people or things did you bring to SafeGraph, and what ones did you jettison because that wasn't important or relevant anymore?
I think sometimes it just depends on the time that you're in and what you're doing. So when we were at LiveRamp, recruiting was harder, and we decided to recruit mostly out of college. At the time, we were really the only startup that was recruiting out of college. Like, we would go to Harvard and there would be like all these big companies, McKinsey, Goldman Sachs, Google. And like, we were one of like two startups that were there. And so when we would give offers, we would have like, probably 2/3 of the people we'd give offers to would take it. And it was very successful. Even by the time LiveRamp, that I left LiveRamp, like every other startup was there. That person who was getting 3 offers before would now have 9 or 10 offers, and our rate would go down, from 2/3 to 25% or something like that of acceptance. And it was just a lot harder to do it. And also their pay went up dramatically. So my last year at LiveRamp, the starting salary of somebody who came right out of Harvard, who just graduated from Harvard, was more than the salary we were paying people who graduated Harvard 2 years ago. Wow. So you had somebody who went from the exact same CS major, who had 2 years more experience, and they were making less money. So it's like, it was just insane. And so it turned out like at that point, like if you're just doing a Moneyball analysis, like recruiting people out of school did not make sense. And so the job market changes pretty dramatically. What skills people are needed changed dramatically. Even the types of people who graduate for certain institutions change as well. So there's all these things that are changing at a rapid pace. And of course, what you need for your particular company is changing also. So it's very, very hard to optimize. The most simple thing, and again, it's the same advice I just keep giving, is just having fewer people. If you're spending less time on it, it's probably a good thing.
Yeah. And so is that essentially the mindset you took to SafeGraph and say, hey, like we want fewer people, we're going to move faster. Obviously, the world's different. We can't recruit direct out of college anymore.
It is the mindset, and of course made many similar mistakes and overhired like many other people. And it's like these things are very hard to do. You can give all the advice that is smart, and it's very hard to take the advice.
Yeah, it's like the proverbial doctor. The doctor tells you advice of what to do, and then you go have a cigarette outside. Right now to give you the advice. Is always terrible. So if you could go back in time at all and think through like, hey, like what advice you would give yourself as a younger person starting a new company, are there certain things that you would say beyond just like don't hire fewer people? Is that the same advice, broken record going after, which is totally fine. I like the consistency.
I mean, the main advice I'd give myself, like if I was going back when I was much younger, is to have met my wife earlier, had kids earlier. It'd be more like life advice. I wish my wife and I met when I was 22. And we got married earlier, and so I think all these different things, the things that have maybe nothing to do with companies. I'm sure there's tons of things in companies that would have done differently as well.
Well, how old were you when you met your wife, and how old were you when?
I was in my early 30s when I met my wife. And it would have been amazing. I don't know if I would have appreciated her in my early 20s. So, but I wish I both met her in my early 20s, and I wish I would have been smart enough to appreciate her in
Yes.
my early 20s. And of course, vice versa. I wish she was, would appreciate me. She may have not appreciated me in her early 20s either. So, but I wish I had the wisdom back then, and somehow the stars aligned that we would have met.
It's funny. My wife would very much say that we met when she was at like late 28 years old and early 29. She would say she definitely would not have even dated me earlier than that. And so she didn't have that appreciation. It was sort of a different
Right.
place in life. This is great though. Like talking about like personal side of things, it's one of the key questions I like to ask because that is a core component, I think, to entrepreneurial excellence largely. What other things from a life perspective are critical? Like how do you get a better understanding of who you should be with or what sort of life you want to build outside of being an entrepreneur?
I mean, I think that for most people, I'm really into relationships and setting people up.
Okay. So you're like the matchmaker.
I wouldn't say I'm very good at it, but I'm into it. And sometimes people complain that they can't find people or, other stuff. And, my main advice to people is like the number one criteria you should have in looking for a soulmate. They are super and utterly into you.
Yeah.
That's your number. There's not even a good number two criteria. And so, yeah, and into you who you truly are, not who you pretend to be. Right. So if you can find someone like that, then that's probably pretty good. Hopefully you're also into them. And then if that's the case, then you guys should, get married and be with one another.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And then I assume your advice would be have kids, do all that stuff as well, or not necessarily?
I mean, that would be my advice for the people. I don't think everyone should have kids. I like having kids. I wish I met my wife earlier and we had more kids. So certainly worked out for me, but I don't think it's great advice for everybody.
Is there advice you have around work-life balance or unity or kind of whatever you want to call it? Like how to, because you are still an incredibly hard worker. You are starting and founding many, many ventures still today. How do you balance that with making sure you're keeping your relationship strong?
I think it's important if you're someone who works hard and you are fine and you're getting married to someone else, they probably already appreciate that about you. And so they probably already have a sense about that about you. And so they probably want you to continue to do that. They know it makes you happy. They know it's something that you care deeply about, etc. So if you care about, working hard, you want someone who likes you for you. And so you don't want to necessarily pretend that you don't want to work hard, and you want someone who likes you for that particular thing. And if you end up with someone who doesn't like you for that, well, then that's problematic. In my case, my wife also works super hard, and I also like that about her. And she likes it about me, and it makes it a little bit easier if you are supportive of one another about those things.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I've seen too many people in relationships who don't have that level of appreciation, and I worry about their relationship future. Um, so beyond giving the advice of like the, get started earlier from a personal perspective, is there any sort of single piece of advice you would want to give anyone who's starting to become an entrepreneur today or entrepreneurs currently to achieve a level of excellence, however we want to define that?
It's very hard to have anything that's too prescriptive just because, again, everyone is so different. Everything is out there. Most advice, and probably the best advice would be like not to listen to advice from people like me. Just to go pursue your own path. And just like, don't do the dumb stuff.
Yeah.
So there are things that clearly are going to becoming a heroin addict is clearly not going to be good. Like it seems very unlikely that that's going to work out. So don't do the dumb stuff that's out there. It's Brian Johnson, who's like really into living. So Brian's a friend of mine, and and he does like all this like insane things, spends gazillion dollars. He's like, but like the simple thing you can do is just like don't do the stupid stuff, right? Don't eat like 3 pizzas at 2 a.m. Right? Like the basic stuff you already know not to do. Just don't try. If you could just not do that, you're probably going to be like relatively healthy. You don't have to do like all the way to the Brian Johnson level to do healthy.
Yeah, it is great advice. It's funny. I tell people something really similar when it comes to the health stuff. I'm like, look, there's 3 key things, right? Sleep well, eat well, work out and have good friends. And if you can do all 4 of those, everything else, like literally you can take all the supplements, but they are supplemental. And I guess, so it sounds like the same advice applies to being an entrepreneur. Like if you are working hard, finding, like testing out all the different tools, vendors, trying things quickly and iterating fast, and then hopefully sleeping well and being able to keep things moving, you have a chance at success.
Yeah. I agree, and I don't even know how important sleeping well is to being a great entrepreneur, but it probably is important for your long-term health.
Yes, my take is that it is helpful, just solely that I can show up every day and hopefully be mostly rested for my team and do well, but I still got to find a way to still work hard. So Auren, thank you so much for the time. Where can folks find you, get in touch if they want to learn more, they want to try to convince you to invest in them, although I didn't get any good advice on how they can convince you to invest in them. But there's some stuff that obviously catches your eye. Where can they find you if they want to learn more?
So one of my biggest vices, I spend way too much time on X. It's a good place to interact with me. I'm at Auren, Auren on X. I love it. I'm super into it. So you can reach out to me there. As you mentioned, I've got a podcast, World of DAS, DAAS, and which comes out every week. And I've got a Substack called 5 Links, where I send 5 links and a few other kind of ditties occasionally as well. So you can reach me in any of those places.
But I will say, just as a personal plug on those things, one, it's shocking me how many people don't try to get in touch with folks alternative ways, like a DM on Twitter or...
Yeah, by the way, email is always the easiest, so just send me an email. So it's usually, that's where I believe email is the best form of communication that's ever been invented. And I think it's better than any DM or any other thing or any Slack or certainly better than like a letter or talking in person. So I love email. I'm a huge believer in email. So it's always good to reach out to people on email.
Do you have an EA or someone to help you optimize your time on that front?
I do.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. And that's something I think a lot of people should look into as well, because you can get to be overwhelming. But anyways, Auren, once again, thank you so much. Everyone should listen to World of DAS, read your blog. You have great advice that is contrarian. You call out VCs for a lot of things that they do. I try to tell people that advice, by the way, recently, that you push on don't let your VCs don't pay for their legal fees.
I hate that.
I hate it too. It's insane. But anyways, lots of good advice in there. Thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Great to talk to you.